Happy coding.
Hello, and welcome to the next video in our series of Intro to Web Dev videos. Um, so far, you've learned a lot. You learned HTML, and you've learned CSS, and you learned JavaScript. So HTML lets you add content to your website. CSS lets you style that content and even lay that content out with stuff like Flexbox. And JavaScript lets you make that content interactive so that it like does stuff when the user clicks and like responds to input and stuff. So this video will sort of build on that to expand the functionality that you get out of JavaScript using one of the sort of foundational like control flow structures, they would be called, which lets you sort of make decisions in your code. And that is called if statements. So I'm going to run through that today, and we're going to write code that can do like one thing or the other depending on how it feels. You'll see what I mean. So yeah, I don't like to just have a bunch of slides and lecture. I like to just dive right into the code, as you probably know by now. So I'm going to jump over to my glitch editor. This is just, a normal glitch editor. I just remixed the glitch project that we've been using in all of these. So hopefully this is, nothing too exciting. So I've got my editor here, and I've got the result here. Okay, so how do I want to talk about this? So we're going to be writing JavaScript, and so maybe what I'll do is I'll start out by I'm just going to put it all in the same script tag for now. I could, have like script source equals whatever and then make a file over here, but I think for now I'm just going to have it in this same file, and I'll close that. And so here we are. So I've got some JavaScript here, and I'm going to maybe like empty out my content just because I want to focus on the JavaScript for now. So that should go away in a second. Maybe not. Refresh. Sure. Okay. So the content's gone because there's nothing in my body section, but I can write JavaScript that does, various things. So I can say like document.write, and then I'll say hello world, and then a semicolon, and we see my hello world up here. So that's JavaScript. You can write code that calls functions to tell your computer to do stuff, to tell the browser to do stuff, and you can even like get input and output stuff to the page, and that's all well and good. I'm using document.write for now because it's a little easier, but you could do like document.getElement by ID, get a reference to an element in the page and change it that way as well. I'm just going to stick with this for now. Maybe I'll change it later, but for now, actually, you know what? I'm going to be annoying. I am going to change it because I want to sort of have, the best practices from here. So I'm going to say heading ID equals output. And so this is kind of review of last week. I'm being a little extra right now, but what I want to do is say like let, I don't know, output element equals document dot get element by ID. And what did I call it? I just called it output. And then I can say output element dot inner text equals hello world. Okay, and then a semicolon. And I don't know why it's being slow, but if I refresh, okay, if I refresh, all right, so something is wonky with my code. So, right, okay, so if I open up my JavaScript console, this is not really planned, but here we are. This is a normal part of coding, and so I'm always tempted to cut these out because I promise I know how to code, but it is part of the normal like coding process is to get errors and stuff. So I'm going to look at my web developer tools, and it's really hard to see, but down in here I see output element is null, and that's because of how I'm doing this. I'm running my script up here, and then it's not seeing that this is an element because the script is running before the page is loaded. So what I can do is I'll say on load equals, maybe I'll just say load, and then I'll have a load function. Function load, and sure, now this should work. Pretty it up, and there we go. Okay, so now I have my HTML, which starts out with a single h1 tag, and when the when the whole web page itself is loaded, I call the load function. The load function itself gets a reference to that output element, and then outputs some text to that element. So, all well and good. This is hopefully a review and a little preview of making a mistake in code and like going and fixing it, which is, again, a normal part of code, normal part of coding. Okay, so anyway, here I am. Now I have my sort of my playground here, and I can start playing around with this. So what I want to do is give myself some white space, and I want to talk about a new type of value or variable. So far you've seen numbers, which are things like 7, 3.14159, 0, negative a million. You know what numbers are. Or you can have things like strings, which is what this is, which is a series of characters that have either single quotes around them or double quotes around them, and you can sort of output text using those. So those are numbers or strings. Those are types of values. And next I'm going to show you a new type of value, and that is called a Boolean. So it's Boolean is how you spell it. It's kind of a goofy word, but it means a value that can only be true or false. And so I can say like, let my value equals true. And this variable is named my value, and it holds a value of true. Exactly like I could have like my value equals 42, or my value equals, insert your favorite Taylor Swift lyric here, I've been on a Sabrina Carpenter kick lately myself. Anyway, so I have this variable, and I can hold a string in it, I can hold a number in it, and I can now hold a Boolean in it, which can either be true or false. And that might not seem super useful right now, but it will pay off in a second. So I can also use that to I'll sort of output that to my my page so I can see it, and it's not super exciting, but it is either false or true. A Boolean can't be anything else. It's either true or false. There's no maybe, there's no like sometimes. It's either yes or no, true or false. And there are, you can hard code it like that, either true or false, but that's not super useful. But what you can do is combine other operators with it. And so, for example, I can have, let's say, I don't know, like, let's say I'll have like current hour equals, I'll pretend that it's in the morning. I'll pretend that it's like 7 a.m. We'll pretend that like the clock is like a 24-hour clock. So it's 0 for midnight, 24 for like the next midnight. So 23 would be 11 p.m. So I'll say it's 7 a.m. And hey, that's Taylor Swift lyric. And I'll say let like is morning, and this is going to hold a Boolean that is equal to the inequality of current hour less than 12. So then I want to say, is morning here, or maybe I can use some string appending to say like, is it morning, and then plus. And so here I have, just a few lines of code, and I'm storing the current time. Let's pretend it's 7 a.m. And then I'm using an inequality, this less than symbol, to check, hey, that current hour that I stored, is that less than 12? And the answer to that is yes or no. It's true or false. And then I just output it to the page. So is it morning? True. If I change this to like 14, which would be like 2 o'clock, then I can see, is it morning? And that will be false. So you can use inequalities to come up with a Boolean, to that evaluate to a Boolean. So there are other, inequalities. So you can use greater than, you can use, so maybe I'll say like, maybe I'll have another one like let is noon, let is noon. And that is going to be equal to the inequality. And I'm going to compare the current hour directly to 12. So current hour, and the way I do that is with 3 equal signs. So then I'm going to say like, is it noon? And then I'll output is noon here. So if the current hour is 14, that's not equal to 12. So this is false. So then I output false here. If I change this to, I don't know, 10, it will still be false because 10 is still not equal to 12. But if I change it to 12, then is it noon ends up being true. So that is the idea of using inequalities. I could also say, the opposite is not noon. And the way I do that is with an exclamation point before my 2 equal signs. So is it not noon? This is getting a little confusing, but if I want to check that something is not equal to a value, I can use, this operator. And, if you want more, you can look it up. You can always say like JavaScript inequality operators. And there's a bunch of them. There may be what you kind of expect. So, you can set, check whether stuff's equal to something, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, the kinds of stuff you can do with numbers. But the idea is that you would use those operators to come up with an inequality, and then you can store that in a Boolean value. Okay, so why are we talking about this? It's not, super duper interesting to be able to hold true or false. This isn't like a good website, because it just says like true or false in directly in the content, which is probably not what you want. That's a little too, programmery. So, you probably don't want the Booleans themselves in your like resulting content. So instead, what you can do is use what's called an if statement, which is the whole point of this video. So let me change some of this. Let me go back to is morning, and is it morning, and then I'll say is morning here, and I think that should go back. Yep. So if it's noon, it's not morning. If it's 10, if it's 10 o'clock in the morning, then it is morning. But let's say I didn't want to say, is it morning true? Let's say I wanted to, I don't know, say good morning, if it was morning. So I'm going to get rid of some of this. In fact, I'm just going to delete it. And so now I'm back to, I don't have anything outputted in my page yet, but I can use an if statement. So I'm going to do that here. This is some new syntax, so I'm going to go pretty slow. If statements look a little bit like calling a function, but they are not a function. They're what's called a control flow, which is something that runs in your code that like decides, what your code does. So I have my is morning variable. It is a Boolean, so it's either true or false. And that means I can use an if statement where I say if. So I'm typing the word if. I'm going to close this because it's going to yell at me a lot. So I typed the word if, and then I'm going to have a open parenthesis, and Glitch is nice enough to add a closing parenthesis. And inside this like if parentheses, I'm going to put a Boolean. So in this case, I'm going to say is morning. And after the closing parenthesis, then I have an open curly brace. And again, Glitch is nice enough to add the closing brace. So I usually give myself some white space like in between the opening and the closing brace. And in here, I can put some code that will only execute or only run if this Boolean is true. So let me say, what did I call my variable up here? Output element dot inner text equals good morning. And maybe I'll add a little emoji because why not? Sure, that one. Sure. Okay, so I've got my if statement. If I zoom out, now I see that my page loads with good morning. So I can refresh just to sort of see that in action. It's not going to be super exciting because it loads right at the beginning of the page. But you see that my content does not contain true or false anymore. It contains, whatever I want. In this case, it's good morning and then a little sunshiny emoji. But the cool part is that now if I change my code, if I change the current hour, let's say that it's actually 5 p.m., which is what, 17. Now I no longer get good morning. I could, change this so it no longer says loading, but you get the idea. So this line of code, which is outputting some text to the web page, only runs if this Boolean is true. So that's what if statements give you. They give you the ability to write code that makes a decision. It either goes left or right. It either does something or not. So that's if statements in a nutshell, really. You can do it this way, and that's fine. Although most folks generally skip a couple of these steps. So I'm going to pretend that my current hours, I'm getting that from somewhere. So I'm going to just kind of put that somewhere up there. So currently what I'm doing is I am first storing this in a separate variable. I'm calling it isMorning, and I'm setting that equal to the inequality, which is fine. It will work, but it's kind of an extra step because you create your variable and then you immediately use it. So a different way to do it is to just put the inequality itself directly inside the if statement. So I can say if, and then I have my inequality here, which is called a Boolean expression, which is just a few pieces of code that evaluate to a Boolean. So when you use this less than operator, it gives you a Boolean in the same way that like the plus sign gives you a number or the minus sign gives you a number. The less than sign or the greater than sign gives you a Boolean. So since I have a Boolean, I can just put it right in my if statement. And this is how most if statements are written. You usually won't see it with like a separate variable. There's nothing wrong with having a separate variable, but this way it sort of reads like you would, in a human language. So you can kind of just read it. Like you can say, if the current hour is less than 12, then I do this. Then I output my good morning, and that should still be working. Well, it's not because I said it was 5 p.m. Let's say it's 8 a.m. again. And there you have my output, and my if statement is sort of more readable, I think, and you don't have to deal with like a million variables. Okay, so that is an if statement, and that's like either doing something or not doing the thing, and that's fine. And in fact, sometimes that's exactly what you want to do. But notice that, if it's not morning, I'm not doing anything. Let's say it's 5 o'clock again. So my code gets here, it stores the value 17 in my current hour, then it gets to this line and it runs this if statement. It says, is current hour less than 12? Well, 17 is not less than 12, so it just skips. It just skips from here down to like the closing curly brace, and then it's kind of done. It doesn't do anything else. But what if I wanted to do something else if it was if that Boolean was not true? So another way I could do it is just have another if statement. So I could say like if current hour is, let's say, greater than or equal to 12, and then I could say output element dot inner text equals good night, and an emoji just for funsies, nighttime. Sure, we'll have that. And that is not working. Why? Let's see. Refresh. Nope. All right. So again, this is a normal part of coding now, especially that we're getting into sort of more involved code, but I probably made a typo somewhere, but to find that out, because my code is not outputting anything, which I think is weird. So I'm going to open up my browser tools to my JavaScript console. Honestly, normally I just have these always open, but for the sake of this video, I hid them. Okay, and it's because why? So right now what I'm doing is I'm sort of like lining up like curly braces. I'm making sure that every opening curly brace has a closing curly brace. And let's see. I'm also checking like my strings to make sure they have sort of quotation marks on each side. So let's see. So another thing I'm doing is just sort of reading through my code line by line. So this one looks okay. That one looks okay. I'm saying if my current hour is less than 12, then do one thing. If my current hour is greater than or equal to 12, then do a different thing. Part of me wonders if maybe I have an extra equal sign here. That could be it. So I could double check that. Oh yeah, I do. Sorry, that's funny. I'm so used to it doesn't matter. Okay, so I have an extra equal sign in here, which I discovered by sort of reading through my code line by line, which again is a normal part of coding. But now here we have good night. So there we go. Okay, so this is one way to do it, and it'll work, but it's a little annoying because you have to write the same thing multiple times, and it's prone to like errors. So let's say like I really wanted to only say good morning if it's like, before 11 a.m. and I would then have to change that everywhere. I'd have to change that here and then anywhere else that I used it below. So instead of that, what I can do is use something that's called an else statement. So I have an if statement here and I can follow that up with an else statement. So an else statement always follows an if. So you can't just have like an else just coming out of nowhere. But if you have an if statement that does something when the Boolean is true, then the else statement will will only execute its code when that Boolean is false. So in this case, I have if the current hour is less than 12, then output good morning. Otherwise, output good night. That's sort of how you read that. And so when the code runs, it checks this if statement. And if it's true, it runs this line. And otherwise, it jumps down to the else and runs this line. So you can sort of have either or going. So if I change this back to, I don't know, like 9 in the morning, I'll get good morning. And if I change it to, I don't know, 2 in the afternoon, I'll get good night. So you have if and now else if. And, you can have white space here if you want, but usually the way I see these written is kind of like this, kind of smushed together like that. But, it's kind of up to you, and I'm not going to be too strict about that. Let's see what glitch does. Yeah, glitch smushes them together, which is fine. Okay, so we're getting there. We now have an if statement and an else statement, and that lets you sort of do one thing if the Boolean is true and a different thing if the Boolean is false. But as you can sort of see here, that's a little limiting because, it's not just good morning or good night. Like what if it's 2 in the afternoon? You don't want to say good night. And you could probably rig something up with just if statements and else statements that like check like, exact values, but that way lies a lot of pain. So the next tool I'll sort of give you in your toolbox is something that's called an else if statement. So we've got an if statement and an else statement, and an else if statement sort of goes like in between those two things. So what do I have here? I currently have, if the current hour is less than 12, then I say good morning, and then otherwise I say good night. So let's say it's in the afternoon, and I wanted to say like if it's less than, I don't know, 5 p.m., I should say good afternoon instead. And the way I'll do that is with an else if statement, which looks like this, where I'll say else, and then a space, and then if, and then a open parenthesis, and then in here, I put a Boolean expression or a Boolean. So I could say, if it's not less than 12, that means it's greater than or equal to 12. So I'll say, otherwise is current hour less than, and what is 5 p.m.? 5 p.m. is 17. And then I have my curly braces, And then inside of there, I put, whatever code I want to run if this case ends up being true. So I'll say output element dot inner text equals good afternoon. And I don't know a good emoji for the afternoon. So let's just use, I don't know, that one. Okay. So now I've got sort of three, I don't know, sections to my if statement, followed by an else if statement, followed by an else statement. And the power of if statements or else if statements or else statements is that only one of these will happen. And it's based on what you put inside of these parentheses. So this should say good afternoon now, and of course it doesn't because I spelled something wrong, probably. I don't know why I'm making so many mistakes in this video, but I'm just sort of staring at the line of code that I just wrote, and my eyes are trained to look for small typos, so I see that I forgot to capitalize this element. So I need that to be capital E, and now it works. So now I have this if statement, else if statement, and else statement, and they sort of combine into this, I don't know, Megazord structure to encapsulate this logic that says if it's morning, do something; if it's afternoon, do a different thing; and if it's nighttime, then do yet a different thing. So the beauty of it is I can change just this one line of code. I can change what hour it is, and the rest of it will just work. So let's say it's I don't know, 6 o'clock in the morning. And I get good morning. Let's say it is, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I get good afternoon. And let's say it is, 11 p.m. I'll get good night. And, I'm using the current hour sort of as a contrived example, but this can work with many different kinds of values and input. I think I'll save that for the next video, but this structure is the same. The last thing I want to sort of talk through is the idea of avoiding unnecessary checks. So this is actually a reasonable example. So I have my current hour, and let's say it's, I don't know, let's say it's 13. In this if, else structure, the way it works is, first off, I store the value 13 in current hour, and I get to this if statement. And I ask, is the current hour less than 13? Is 13 less than 12? Well, no, it's not. So the code skips down to the next sort of closing curly bracket, and then it runs this else if, and it asks the next question. It says, well, is the current hour less than 17? Is it less than 5 p.m.? And this works because if I get to this line of code, then I know that it's after 12. I know that it's afternoon, because if it was less than 12, then this line of code would run, and it would then not check any other condition. It would not check the else if, and it would not run the else. It would only run this line of code and then sort of skip to the bottom of it, which means that when I check, is my current hour less than 17, really what I'm checking is it in between 12 and 17, because I already know that it's, more than 12, it's greater than 12, because I got here, right? So that's one way to sort of avoid unnecessary checks. And that means that the order that you write your if statements and your else if statements are pretty important. So if I had something like, is my current hour, let's say I switch these up. So I'm going to say 17 and 12. So I'm just going to flip the order of my good morning and my good afternoon. So here I am saying, if my current hour is less than 17, so if it's before 5 p.m., then I say good afternoon. Otherwise, if it's before 12, I say good morning, and then otherwise I say good night. And you might expect this to work. It sort of reads, as a human might read it, but let's see what happens if I have a value that's like really early in the morning, make it super obvious. So it's 6 a.m. now. And what's going to happen is, well, let's zoom out and just see what happens. It says good afternoon, even though it's 6 a.m. And, why is that? And it's because if you read the code, what's happening is first it checks if is the current hour less than 17? Well, 6 is less than 17. Therefore, this evaluates to true. And it outputs good afternoon. And since the first if statement evaluated to true, then it skips the rest. It does not even check, is it less than 12? So if you're dealing with inequalities like this, the order is very important. So make sure that you have it in a way that's like checking it in an order that uses that logic that, like, if this one is not true, then you can sort of use that in your next if statement. Okay, so let me undo some of this, and maybe I'll just fill this out just to sort of complete the thought. So right now I have morning, afternoon, and night. Maybe I'll just add a few more just to sort of show that structure. So, it's not morning if it's like, I don't know, 3 a.m., at least not for me. So I'll say like if current hour is less than, I don't know, 6 a.m. is like right on the border of a reasonable time to get up in the morning. That's where I'll say good morning. And then I'm going to change this to an else if. Actually, I don't want to do that. I want to have that be good morning. And here I want to say like, so it's before 6 a.m. So here I'll say like, go back to bed. Maybe have a little bed emoji. Is that an emoji? Yeah, okay, it works. So if it's less than 6, it's before 6 a.m. Then I say, go back to bed. If it's before 12, that means it's the morning. It's between 6 a.m. and 12. So I say good morning. If it's between 12 and 17, so between noon and 5 p.m., I say good afternoon. And maybe I'll say something like else if current hour is less than, I don't know, what's a reasonable like evening. So let's say 10. So what is that? That's 22, I think. And then curly braces, and I'll say output element dot inner text equals good evening. And one more emoji just for fun. Let's go with sure. And so now my if statement is pretty involved. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different cases that all do different things based on the value of a single variable. So I can say, what happens if it's 4 a.m.? I see go back to bed, which is good advice. What happens if it is, 8 a.m.? I see good morning. What happens if it is 1 p.m.? I see good afternoon. And let's see, where am I? What happens if it is like 6 p.m.? I see good evening. And finally, what if I see that it is like 11 p.m.? I see good night. And again, like I didn't have to change anything else. I didn't have to change anything in my HTML. It's all sort of encoded in these if statements, which lets my code make decisions based on the value of a variable. So from here, where it gets really interesting is like taking input from a user and then feeding that through some if statements and doing different things. But I think I'll save that for a different video. I've been trying to make these reasonably shorter for you. But for now, this is the core of if statements. As always, you can get more information either on Happy Coding, my website, or if you type into your favorite search engine, JavaScript if statements. There's a ton more info. I covered sort of the high level here, but there's a ton more out there. So I definitely recommend like also reading through a tutorial as you start coding these up. All right, that's where I will leave it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one where we will actually start like mixing and matching this with some user input, which will get interesting. But all right, until then, as always, happy coding.